All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive that's going to take us into the future. We're talking about world order, a concept that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but it's rooted in some pretty serious research.
Yeah, we've been digging through research notes, excerpts from books on global governance, political federations, you name it. And the idea of a world order, as envisioned by Baha'u'llah, is at the heart of it all.
What I find fascinating is that our source material traces this idea way back, like it's been brewing for centuries, connecting to historical precedents and major thinkers. It's wild.
It is. But let's start with the core, Baha'u'llah's vision.
Right, he called for two major shifts, right? One for individuals, like how we think and act, and then one for society, like reshaping how the whole world works.
Absolutely. And the key to both is the oneness of humanity. That's the bedrock of his vision for a new world order.
It's about moving past all the divisions, all the stuff that's kept us fighting for centuries, right?
Exactly. Recognizing we're all connected, all part of the same human family.
Okay, but how do you actually go from separate nations to a unified global system? That's where I think Shoghi Effendi's framework for a future world superstate comes in. He laid out some seriously mind-blowing features.
One that jumps out is countries giving up their right to wage war. Like that power goes to the world superstate and they maintain peace.
Whoa, a world without armies and constant threats.
Yeah.
That's a lot to take in. And there's more, right? He also envisioned a global parliament.
Elected by the people so everyone has a voice in how they're governed.
That's incredible. And to make sure everything's fair, there'd be a supreme tribunal.
Yeah, a global court with real power. Their judgments would be binding for everyone.
So no more international disputes dragging on forever. That's a serious game changer. But what really struck me is the idea that economic barriers, religious fanaticism, racial animosity, like all that would be gone.
It goes way deeper than just new political structures. It's about fixing the things that cause conflict and division in the first place.
It's like saying real world peace has to come from within us, not just imposed from above.
You got it. It's that inner transformation that prioritizes unity and the well-being of everyone.
Did Baha'u'llah just wait around for this transformation to happen?
No, not at all. He actually wrote to major world leaders, urging them to think about this new world order.
He reached out to people like Queen Victoria and Napoleon III. Seriously, what'd they say?
Well, their reactions were mixed. Queen Victoria apparently responded with a bit of cautious curiosity, something like, if it's from God, it'll last. If not, it won't hurt.
And Napoleon.
Not so much. Legend has it, he joked, if he's one god, I'm two gods.
Oh, wow. Talk about different perspectives. And it sounds like those who weren't immediately on board influenced this idea of the lesser peace, right?
Exactly. It's like a stepping stone. Political unity as a way to move towards lasting global order, even without everyone transforming individually.
So institutions like the League of Nations and the UN are those examples of the lesser peace.
They are. Attempts, however imperfect, at global cooperation and conflict resolution.
But can we really have lasting peace without addressing the deeper stuff, like prejudice and greed? It feels like the most great peace and the lesser peace have to work together.
That's a great point. It raises a question for all of us. What's our role in building a peaceful world? Just supporting the right structures? Or is there something more, something inside us that needs to change?
Now we're getting philosophical, but hold on. This idea of global governance, this didn't just pop up out of nowhere with Baha'u'llah, did it?
No. Thinkers like Rousseau and Kant were exploring similar ideas way back when.
So it's not a brand new concept.
Not at all. But what's different about the Baha'i faith is its direct call for world peace through political union.
Wow. A religion advocating for a world federation, that's pretty radical.
Hmm.
And you mentioned earlier there were even congressional hearings about this back in the 40s and 50s.
Yes. People were seriously thinking about a unified world order, even in U.S. politics.
So this concept has been on the table for a while. But what exactly is a federation? Same as a single world government?
Not quite. It's not about erasing countries or making a giant, all-powerful world state.
So more like individual states choosing to work together, but still keeping their own thing going.
You got it. Think of the United States, right? Bunch of independent states under a common government, but with their own laws and cultures.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. A successful example of federation.
And it's super relevant to the World Federation idea. Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers, made a strong case for a powerful central government in Federalist Number 15.
He argued for unity, right? To prevent chaos and ensure national unity.
Exactly. And if we apply that logic to a global scale, it raises some big questions.
Like how much power a world government should have, how it would work, how it would respect individual nations, and how would we even get there from where we are now. Those are some serious hurdles to overcome.
You're telling me. And our sources outline 4 major challenges: membership, representation, powers, and how to actually make it happen.
Okay, let's break those down. First up, membership. Is it a free-for-all? Or is there some kind of criteria to join this global club?
Some argue for universal membership, like everyone's in no matter what. But others worry about that. Imagine trying to get countries with totally opposite views to agree on anything.
Yikes, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Right. So some, like Clarence Street, proposed a limited democratic membership, only those committed to democracy and human rights.
So you'd need some shared values from the start. Makes sense. But even then, how do you ensure everyone's voice is heard? That's where representation gets tricky.
Absolutely. There have been some interesting proposals. For example, Grenville Clark and Louis Bisson suggested a weighted voting system within the UN General Assembly.
Weighted voting, what's that?
It means a nation's voting power would depend on things like population size, education levels, and their economy.
Ah, so not just one vote per country. Makes sense, actually. But wasn't there another idea about representation, too?
Yeah, the Chicago Committee proposed regional elections and electoral colleges, kind of like what the U.S. does. A way to balance things out while still acknowledging the diversity of different regions.
So lots of different ways to think about representation. No easy answers, huh?
Nope. And then there's the question of how much power this World Federation would actually have. Some argue for a minimalist approach, just the essentials to keep the peace.
Start small and build from there.
Exactly. But others, like Borghese and the Chicago Committee, think it needs more teeth, more authority to tackle global issues.
Like what kind of issues are we talking?
Things like global commerce, communications, even world finance. They argue that to really fix things, a world federation needs a bigger role.
Wow, that's a lot of power.
It is, but the idea is to address the root causes of conflict and inequality, to create a more just and equitable world.
Ambitious, for sure. But even if we could agree on all that, how do we go from where we are now to a unified world order?
That's the million-dollar question, and there are different schools of thought on how to make that transition.
Let's hear them. What are the options?
One is public education and reforming existing institutions. Maybe a UN review conference or even a whole new constitutional convention.
So working within the system to push for change.
Exactly. Another is the parliamentary approach. Basically, national legislators introduce resolutions supporting a world federation.
Like a global grassroots movement. I like it. What else?
And then there's the People's Convention approach, directly electing delegates to a world constitutional convention, bypassing national governments altogether.
Whoa, that's bold. Taking matters into the people's hands.
It is. But all these approaches, in their own way, challenge how things are done now. They force us to rethink how we could organize ourselves as a global community.
It's not just tinkering around the edges, is it? This is about a fundamental shift, realizing we're all connected and that our future depends on working together, not against each other.
You nailed it. A fully unified world federation might seem far off, but the fact that people are even talking about these ideas, actively thinking about them, shows how deeply we yearn for a more peaceful and just world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. The vision of a new world order, the history, the challenges, and the different ways we might actually get there. Where do we go from here?
Well, let's bring it back to the present. What does the world look like right now in terms of global governance? And are there any signs that we're moving, however slowly, towards something more unified, something closer to a federalist system?
Sounds like a good place to start.
So we've talked about this vision of a world united, right? But how does that compare to the world we actually live in? Our sources get into the current state of global governance, and it turns out there are 3 main ways countries interact on the world stage.
Oh, yeah. I remember this from way back, my political science days. Balance of power, collective security, and rule of law. But a refresher on how those actually work in the real world would be great.
Absolutely. So balance of power, it's that classic idea of countries looking out for themselves, forming alliances, building up militaries, all to make sure no one gets too strong.
Right. It's like keep your enemies close and your allies closer, that kind of thing.
Exactly. The idea is that this balance prevents one nation from dominating and causing trouble. But as you can imagine, it can get pretty unstable. Leads to arms races and constant fear of conflict.
Yeah, that sounds stressful. What about collective security? Isn't that the whole point of the United Nations?
You got it. Collective security is the idea that countries team up to deal with threats to peace, like a global neighborhood watch.
So strength in numbers.
Right. The UN is a prime example. Countries come together, try to find common ground, and work things out peacefully, but it doesn't always work perfectly, does it?
True. The UN has had its struggles, for sure. Feels like national interests often get in the way of actually doing something. Okay, what about rule of law? How does that play out?
Rule of law is all about international laws and agreements that everyone's supposed to follow, creating a global legal framework applied equally to everyone, no matter how powerful they are.
So like global rules of the road, but for countries.
Precisely. And to enforce these rules, you have international courts, like the International Criminal Court, holding people accountable for serious violations.
So which of these three approaches is the most common in the world today?
It's not so simple as picking one. All three are at play in today's world. You see balance of power in regional conflicts, collective security efforts through the UN, and international law trying to regulate how states behave.
So it's kind of a mix, not quite a world federation, but some cooperation and movement towards a more rule-based system.
Right. And it's interesting, while a single world government might seem like the most obvious path to a world federation, lots of experts are skeptical about that.
Oh, really? Why is that? I'd think having one global authority would be more efficient for dealing with global issues, right?
Maybe in theory, but there are concerns about the concentration of power, about suppressing different cultures and political systems, and the risk of it going wrong, creating a global tyranny.
I see. It's like putting all your eggs in one basket. If it goes bad, the consequences are huge.
Exactly. What many favor instead is a network of international organizations, each with its own focus, working together.
Ah, so more like a global team effort.
Perfect analogy. And our sources bring up the European Union as a possible model for this kind of system.
The EU, huh? It's a fascinating example of regional integration. But how does that connect to World Federation?
Well, the EU shows that it is possible for independent countries to pool their resources, share some authority, and create a system of supranational governance.
Supranational governance. Sounds pretty technical.
Basically, it's about governing bodies that have power over multiple countries. The EU has a parliament, a court of justice, a central bank. They make decisions that affect all member states.
So it's kind of like a mini federation within Europe.
Yeah, you could say that. And while the EU has its problems, like Brexit, for example, it's still a real-world example of nations working together for mutual benefit.
It's a proof of concept, right? Showing that working together isn't just some impossible dream.
Exactly. And we're also seeing a trend towards world governance, which is different from a world government.
How so?
It's more about the processes, the ways we address global issues, rather than having a single central authority. It includes international law, global institutions, non-governmental organizations, all sorts of cooperation.
That sounds more adaptable, more like a living system that can change as needed.
Right. And a big part of world governance is the changing role of international law. There's a shift happening from just focusing on state sovereignty to putting more emphasis on the rights of individuals.
So recognizing that states aren't the only ones that matter on the global stage. People have rights too, no matter where they live or what their government's like.
Exactly. And this challenges the old way of thinking about state sovereignty. Maybe states need to give up some of their power to international bodies to protect everyone's rights.
You know, it's incredible to think that these ideas, which seem so radical now, have such a long history. The concept of world federation isn't new at all.
It's true. We tend to focus on more recent thinkers, but there were visionaries who imagined a unified world centuries ago.
Okay, history time. Who are some of these early pioneers of world federation?
Well, the idea goes way back to ancient civilizations. Ancient Israel, with its kingdom of tribes and the Delian League of Greek city-states, they had some early elements of federalism.
Interesting. But those systems didn't exactly last, did they?
No, they eventually fell apart because of conflicts and pressures, but they were early attempts at creating unity and cooperation.
Makes sense. So who else was promoting a more unified world back then?
Well, during the High Middle Ages, you have Dante, the Italian poet and philosopher. He actually argued for a unified world under a single monarch in his book De Monarchia, emphasized the unity of humankind and liberty under law.
Wow, Dante had no idea he was into world federation.
He was way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
And then, as Europe was dealing with the Reformation and religious wars, we see more proposals for political union as a path to peace. Henry V of France, for instance, imagined a grand design for Europe.
Wasn't William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, also thinking along those lines?
Yes, he wrote an essay advocating for a federal European state with a parliament to ensure justice.
It's fascinating how this idea keeps coming up throughout history, usually after periods of conflict. It's like humanity's searching for a way to break the cycle of violence.
It shows our deep desire for a better world. And in the 18th century, we have Abbé de Saint-Pierre, a French priest who wrote a plan for perpetual peace.
Perpetual peace, huh? What was his idea?
He believed that states were naturally interdependent, so they needed a confederation to survive. He basically argued that peace was in everyone's best interest.
And then, of course, there's the founding of the United States, a major moment in the history of federalism.
Definitely a turning point. The U.S. showed that diverse states could unite under a shared government while keeping their own identities.
It wasn't a perfect system, but it worked.
Right. And the debates from that time are still relevant today as we consider world federation. The arguments in the Federalist Papers, especially those by Alexander Hamilton.
He was all about a strong central government, right?
Yep. He focused on the U.S., of course, but his ideas about the need for unity resonate with those thinking about a world federation today.
Yeah, it's like the U.S. was an experiment in federalism, a testing ground for the idea of a united world.
Exactly. And we can't forget Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher.
Kant. I remember trying to read his Critique of Pure Reason back in college. I had no idea he was into world peace.
He was a big proponent. He wrote a lot about perpetual peace, arguing that humans would eventually create a world without war, ruled by international law. He even imagined a League of Peace, a bunch of free states working together.
He was basically predicting the UN way back then.
Well, his vision was a little different, but his ideas definitely influenced later movements toward things like the UN.
It's amazing to see how these ideas have evolved over time. But after all this history, is world federation a realistic goal, or are we just dreaming?
The big question. No easy answer, really. But what's clear is that humans have always longed for a peaceful, just, and united world. It's been a driving force for centuries.
And even if we're not there yet, it does seem like we're moving in the right direction. International law is growing, the world's getting more interconnected, and people are realizing that global problems need global solutions.
Absolutely. There will always be those who cling to old ways of thinking. But there are so many people working towards a better world, a world where cooperation wins.
It's inspiring to see that, even with all the chaos, that hope for a unified and peaceful future is still alive.
It is. And that might be the biggest takeaway from our depth dive today.
So we've covered the history, the challenges, the current situation, but we've been focusing a lot on the obstacles. What about the benefits of a world federation? What would a truly united world look like?
That's where we'll pick up next time.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, right? The history of world federation, the challenges, and the current state of things. It can get a little, overwhelming at times.
I hear ya. Focusing on the problems can make it all seem kind of hopeless. But that's why I'm excited about this next part. It's time to look at the potential benefits. Let's get optimistic.
Okay, I'm all ears. Paint me a picture of what a world with a successful world federation would actually look like. What would be the good stuff?
All right, so imagine we've made that transition, right? We've got a functional, just world federation. One of the biggest things, and this is right off the bat, is the end of large-scale wars.
Wait, hold on. No more war at all. I know that's the goal. But can we even imagine a world completely without conflict?
It might sound utopian, but think about it. With a world federation to enforce the law, resolve disputes peacefully, there's no reason for countries to fight wars.
So instead of all those resources going to the military, countries could focus on other things.
Exactly. Think about it. All that money, all that effort could be used to address global poverty, hunger, disease. We could make some serious progress on those age-old problems.
Okay, that's a good point. But war isn't the only problem, right? What about things like climate change? Those are global issues that cross borders.
You're absolutely right. Climate change is a perfect example. It needs a global solution. A unified global response means we can coordinate efforts, reduce emissions, invest in renewable energy, protect the planet for the future.
No more arguing about who's responsible or who should do what. Everyone's in it together.
Exactly. We can pool our resources, our knowledge, our technology to solve these really complex challenges. And it's not just about the big issues either. Think about scientific research, cultural exchange, education. A unified world could mean incredible collaboration.
It's like taking globalization to the next level, right?
Yeah,
Working together to move forward instead of constantly competing.
exactly. Combine the best minds from everywhere and imagine the breakthroughs we could have. Medicine, technology, all sorts of fields.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal here. But what about the economics of it all? Would we have one global economy?
It's a good question. If you remove trade barriers, stabilize the global market, you could see a huge boost in innovation and new businesses. Free flow of goods, services, ideas. It could lead to economic growth like we've never seen before.
So we wouldn't necessarily need a single currency or some world government controlling everything.
Not necessarily. There are different ways a world federation can manage economic stuff, but the key is cooperation, fair competition, so everyone benefits.
So maybe a world federation could actually address the root causes of inequality and poverty.
That's definitely the hope. A level playing field, global cooperation. It could create a world where everyone has a chance to thrive no matter where they come from.
This all sounds amazing, but how do we actually get there from where we are now?
You're right, it's not going to be easy. It's a long process. We have to fundamentally change how we think about ourselves and the world.
So it's not just about changing laws and setting up new institutions. It's about changing how we see things.
You got it. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that we're all part of the same human family. It's about putting the well-being of the planet and everyone on it first.
So a global consciousness going beyond borders and ideologies.
Exactly. But it can feel overwhelming, right? What can we as individuals actually do to contribute to that shift?
Yeah, it does feel pretty big.
It does. But remember, every major change throughout history started with individuals taking action. Start by learning about these issues. Talk to people. Support organizations that are working for peace, justice, and cooperation.
So be informed, be engaged, be a citizen of the world, not just our own little corner of it.
Exactly. And make conscious choices every day. Supporting fair trade, reducing your environmental impact, treating everyone with respect. These are small steps, but they add up.
It's a good reminder that change doesn't have to be some huge sweeping thing. It can start with us.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of world order, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider.
Okay, lay it on me. What you got?
Just imagine that a world federation does happen in your lifetime. What would be the best thing about it for you? And what would be the biggest challenge?
Wow, those are some deep questions. I have to think about those.
That's what it's all about. We've covered a lot today, but this is just the beginning. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep imagining what a world united in peace and cooperation could look like.
Well said. And to all our listeners, keep the deep dive going. The journey towards a more unified world might be long and complicated, but it's a journey worth taking. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.